there's this term at the moment around deep tech investment, right, which is pretty comical because it's, well, what is it? It's become really trendy. One of the approaches of VCs is the spray and pray, which is really derogatory, right? But it's the let's go and invest in 10 companies hoping, or 100 companies even, and hope that one will survive. Because you have to describe what is a harrowing journey through the 7 layers of hell.
Hey guys, it's Charles and welcome to Good Clinical, a podcast and YouTube channel dedicated to showcasing the future of medicine and human health. On today's episode, we're covering venture capital. What is venture capital, you ask? Well, you'll find out in just a minute, but let's just say it's a core ingredient for a thriving, innovative ecosystem. On today's episode, we have John Robson from Bridgewest Ventures to take us through this topic. G'day, John. Thank you for joining us on the podcast.
G'day, Charles. Thanks very much for having me.
So, how was the flight up today?
Oh, wonderful. Beautiful, beautiful flight from Wellington. Expensive, but beautiful.
Yeah, I have to say, I flew down recently to Christchurch for a conference, and I was planning on taking my family with me. I've got a wife and young daughter, just to get away for the weekend, and saw the cost of return flights for 2 extra tickets, and I thought, you know what? It's a little bit too much. They've really gone up recently, those domestic flights, haven't they?
Totally. It's certainly hurting. I'm quite enjoying Jetstar, if I'm honest, for a plug. It's been on time.
Yeah,
exactly what I need.
Yeah, I have to say I took a Jetstar flight over the Tasman, and let's just say there was a couple on there that probably was enjoying a few too many Sauvignon Blancs, and when you don't have any entertainment in front of you, that was my entertainment.
No, fair enough.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
Anyway, so venture capital, this is a really pivotal requirement or necessary ingredient for a thriving innovation ecosystem. It's one of many different alternatives for capital, right? It's not the one and only way that a founder can raise money.
Yeah.
What do people maybe misunderstand about venture capital, and what do they need to know to really understand the importance of it?
Yeah, it's a really tough question to open up. Thanks very much, Charles.
No worries.
And it means many things to many people. I mean, the most obvious one is people talk about vulture capital rather than venture capital, which is kind of a throwback to the 80s of the exploitive VC turning up with braces and buying companies and selling companies. But the reality is a long way from that. And certainly in New Zealand, it seems to be a slightly more benign ecosystem. I'd say that most players here, not all, but most players here really do focus on providing value to those companies they're investing in. So at its heart, what is venture capital? So we're investing in companies, taking some risk for a long-term gain. So there's very few VCs in New Zealand that are short-term, 1 year or 2 year exits. It really is a long-term bet or investment in a sector or a company, or in most cases in New Zealand, an individual to get an outcome. So we're putting capital on the table. We're taking equity typically. We can talk about different types of investment, whether it's safe notes or convertible bonds. But in most cases, VCs are taking equity and some sort of right over a company, an ownership stake, if you like. And then that gives them the chance or the desire to then create an inflection point, some value in that company. And VCs operate in really different ways. New Zealand, there's a really wide range. But on the whole, most of the VCs here are quite active in the companies that they invest in. So the definition, if I was to shorten it, would be taking an active investment in a company for a future return of some sort.
Yeah. So there's probably 2 core aspects, right? So it's the active investment and it's the long-term horizon. It's not, I'll throw some money at it and let it do what it is going to do, or it's not, I'm going to throw some money at it and expect, a return in the next 6 to 12 months. So that really sets it apart from other versions of capital raising.
Pretty much. And some VCs will never lead around. And when you hear this term, are they leading around? It's typically they're putting the most money in or they're setting the price effectively. And some of the firms here, particularly some of the government firms, they're not really active investors. They'll trust somebody else to do the due diligence and to be the lead, if you like, and they'll come alongside. But most of the VCs, certainly the firms that are in the Callaghan Innovation Deep Tech program, the same as Bridgewest, we're quite active. And the reason we're active is we're taking very early stage companies. And you have to be, because the whole point is to try and help first time founders or early stage founders or university founders through this really complicated early stage investment. And it's terrifying, if I'm honest. I mean, you've got 2 or 3 years to even get to the start line. So VCs, where we operate in the deep tech space, is a scary place for many people. But VC can be early stage, late stage. But we'll focus today, I think, on perhaps early stage because it's the one that's most active at the moment, I think, in New Zealand.
Why do you think that is?
Well, there's this term at the moment around deep tech investment, right, which is pretty comical because what is it? It's become really trendy. And it's everybody's saying I'm a deep tech investor. But the reality is New Zealand has an innovation ecosystem that's quite sensational and has for generations. And what we have at the moment is some of the technology that's available to our innovators and some of the ways in which they operate are really quite superb. People out of necessity are doing great things in university labs, in garages, and that is always coupled with technology. So it becomes a technology play. And then because of New Zealand's unique view of, say, agriculture, you kind of have this blend of tech with biotech. And suddenly you've got this booming biotech industry which encompasses agriculture, farming, climate, laboratory work, immunotherapy, all these new technologies. And you've got universities participating in this wonderful upside. The challenge now is how do you capitalize on many years of intelligence and research to actually create valuable companies that can export from New Zealand?
Yeah, because that's really the secret sauce, right? That's the trick. Converting great ideas, great scientific discovery into something meaningful, something valuable, and something that it's going to take the economy.
Spot on. And that's the trick to VC.
Yeah.
And one of the approaches of VCs is the spray and pray, which is really derogatory, right? But it's let's go and invest in 10 companies hoping, or 100 companies even, and hope that one will survive. That's not the model that we follow. We're very active and we don't want any to fail. It's naive to think that they won't. And in many cases, the science just won't work, or the founder, goes on a different trajectory. There's so many reasons for a company to fail. But in biotech, it has to be hands-on. You have to ride this enormous wave of terror. But many companies will fail. It's not an easy path.
No, especially when you're creating something brand new.
New. It's terrifying.
If you're iterating, there's less risk because some of the unknowns have been resolved.
Yeah.
But when it's brand new, has that huge potential, but massive upside risk, downside risk, rather.
No, you're spot on. And New Zealand is not immune from making mistakes. But what we found, and particularly with the Callaghan program, what they've done with their model is to try and encourage VCs or funds like ours to invest very early stage. So it's created a bit of excitement around suddenly you've got some big players, and it's good to put a plug in for, say, WNT and Brandon Capital, because we're all playing early stage. We're all putting money at risk, capital at risk in very early stage companies with an expectation that there's a return at some point. And we've kind of created, alongside Callaghan, this excitement in deep tech. And then we've seen a lot of other funds coming in and building momentum. So the likes of Nuance, particularly strong in terms of the being impactful, looking at plays around founder awareness for equity. They're really sort of setting the scene, I think, for an ethical play as a VC. We're seeing a number of companies like that popping up. Yeah,
I mean, I think it's fantastic because the obviously getting in early is risky. Yet, like if it's a success, it'll be immensely successful, and that sends a really strong signal to everyone else operating in the space that it is possible to do these great things from New Zealand.
Absolutely.
If we're just iterating over and over and again, it doesn't seem like a really strong signal that, hey, this is possible.
No, and I think our founders and our universities are brave in terms of the research. But we've got decades of really cool research that has failed to reach commercial outcomes for whatever reason. And then we have some phenomenal success stories like Rocket Labs and some of these other biotech companies as well that have come from nothing. But people look at it and go, wow, that's an overnight success. But it's 10 years. And often it's 10 years of research before it even gets to become a commercial entity. So it's a brave industry, that's for sure.
Yeah. So we've got all this amazing research to capitalize on, and that's why you kind of said that's one of the reasons why there's this interest in deep tech. But what if we could change anything in the current setup of the system right now that could move the needle to make it more likely that for a big success, or more likely that would be more of this taking place? What would it be? Because I've asked this question to a few people, and a lot of people have mentioned various answers have been, changing the regulatory framework to unlock more commercialization of biotech. Other people have said human capital is a real, it's quite tight within New Zealand, with small population, it's hard to draw people here. financial capital. Curious to see from your perspective what the biggest lever might be.
Well, you just gave the best answers actually, Charles, so I would refer to you on that. But let's take them in turn, and let's focus on, let's pick biotech as an industry, as an example. Sorry, I've actually forgotten your question. Let's just rephrase it.
Longest levers longest move the needle. A lot of idioms here, sorry.
Yeah, that's good. So let's take biotech as an example in terms of an industry that can move the needle, and the kind of the issues in that sector are apparent across all sectors. So we'll use that just as an example, but sure. I think it's incumbent in all of them. So biotech is hideously expensive and requires quite significant infrastructure. And what we've seen around the world, particularly in Australia more recently, and certainly in Western Australia, is quite sizable government investment in the core infrastructure that underpins, let's call it, scientific discovery. Mm-hmm. And in New Zealand, that's been reserved for universities and Crown Research Institutes, including the site at Graceville Callahan's GIQ. And this has been amazing work. But in order to move the dial from research and academic purpose and outcomes, which is commendable, but in order to turn the dial to make commercial outcomes which are impactful to the world, you need substantial government support for the core infrastructure. So if we look at, say, the film industry, we look at the gaming industry, and we look at, say, horse racing even, there's been sizable investment from a government standpoint to create sectors that become self-sustainable. Within biotech, we're really poor relation because we take our companies out of universities or we try and form a new company. And BioVirus is probably a good example where it's a lentiviral manufacturing business. It could not have been a startup without support from Callahan for provision of a world-class PC2 lab for manufacturing. So lots of other companies haven't had the relationship that we've had with Callahan and are as deserving. So how do you enable them? How do you provide support to them? So if you look at Australia or the US, there are big innovation campuses where you can effectively lease a lab. And it's a fully equipped lab with fume hoods and centrifuges and all the things that you need that a startup can't possibly afford. So if you started in a university, the challenge is how the hell do you get out of there? Because you have so many benefits in terms of leasing and equipment. In order for you to then leapfrog and become a real sustainable business, you've got to actually leave the university site, and there's nowhere to go. So the first one really is infrastructure. The second one, which you also answered, which was beautiful, was people. It's talent. So if you're building a burgeoning ecosystem around biotech, you're relying on the universities to turn out PhD students or grads with appropriate qualifications. In a modern world, one of those qualifications would be things like, say, GMP production, not just biotech. So having specializations in manufacturing, for example, we don't have those things. So we're relying on students coming into New Zealand with those skills. And there are a couple of things that make that difficult. One is salaries here are typically lower, it seems, than what you can achieve in Australia, and housing. So in order to attract people into the country, we need to provide both of those things, salary and somewhere to live. And it's not easy to make the transition to New Zealand. So we would love to see the door opened wide to appropriately qualified doctors, nurses, scientists that want to be part of a biotech ecosystem. If I talk about doctors and nurses, if we're looking to build out a medical infrastructure here to support our CAR T-cell programs, for providing services for patients with cancer, how are you going to support that unless you've got scores of nurses, scores of doctors, physicians coming in who can actually administer and support? And then the third one, which you also answered, really is about regulation. So what needs to change? And there are two documents that I'd say that your listeners should really look out for. There was one in 2020 that was written by Biotech NZ. So disclaimer, I'm on the Biotech NZ board. And that document was published, it's 4 years ago now. But it sets out some really interesting positions around how biotech could be successful in New Zealand and what the government would need to do. And I bring it up now because some of those things are in action. And we're seeing that the proposal that was made is true. And it was infrastructure, it was nurses. And at the time, it looked at the economic benefits to New Zealand. And there was about, I think, 200 plus companies that were in biotech at that point. And it's a multi-billion-dollar business around the world. And if you can capture a proportion of that from New Zealand, it's a game changer. It's suddenly you get to a point where we'll call it critical mass, and you start to get people looking at New Zealand as a serious place to do business in biotech. And we have the technology in terms of the skills and the research. What we don't have is the people and the infrastructure and the regulation that allows us to do something. So the second paper is the one that was put out by the National Party last year, 2023, called Harnessing Biotech. Mm-hmm. And it was their view about what regulations needed to be changed to enable, say, gene editing, or even allow us to actually look at climate benefits from better crop production using gene editing. They're all sensible things, and hopefully next year we'll see some of the fruits of those. Yeah. But they changed the landscape quite significantly.
Yeah.
I hope that was a long-winded way of saying there's loads of things we could do. Yeah. Infrastructure, people, regulation.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that infrastructure piece, but that makes a lot of sense. I mean, anything in biotech is horrendously expensive, and you just think, oh, it's expensive because that's just how it is. I mean, but you don't think of why. Well, it's down to literally the beakers and the benches and the other equipment that you need.
Yeah.
That if you would have to purchase that off the rack, shall we say, it'd be bankrupting.
There are so many basic things. So if you're running a PC2 lab, it's lab coats, it's kind of basic. Yeah, gloves, solutions, but the equipment itself is significantly expensive. And in order to be a world-class company, you need to stay current. And it's a fact that our universities have good equipment, but a lot of it's obsolete. Mm-hmm. So if you're teaching students on obsolete equipment, you're never gonna win.
Yeah. That's super interesting, because a lot of these discussions, there's a lot that I've had on this podcast about biotech in general. There's a lot of excitement or looking forward to the future of what this could be, because everyone wants biotech to be successful in New Zealand. There's a lot of people that are really smart. There's a lot of people that are really motivated, and there's a lot of people that have really great ideas. And you put all that together, we've got the beginnings of a good recipe for a lovely, thriving ecosystem. But there obviously are risks in place. If the regulations don't change, if we don't have if we lose out on skilled migrants coming to New Zealand, to how are they going to fill the roles that we need to actually make this happen? Yep. Capital being available to support these endeavours. But I'm still very optimistic. I mean, you must be, because this is your bread and butter. Where do you see it going in the next 5-10 years?
Yeah, these are tough questions, Giles. All right, let's take it in two pieces. Let's talk about the money, then let's talk about regulation.
Sure.
So the money is always going to chase success. So which comes first? Do we have to get the success, then the money, or the money, then success? Now, New Zealand, I think, has enough confidence and enough good brand globally that it's a good place to do business. Yep. We have phenomenal scientists and universities. They're some of the best in the world. Mm-hmm. What we don't have is the proof of our success. So there's definitely money coming in, and there has been money coming in. The problem we have is a lot of the local money is drying up a little. Mm-hmm. Interest rates are reasonably high now. That's a compete for VC, because it's a low risk investment really. Mm-hmm. You have a challenging situation globally around capital. So if the US money or the European money dries up, it does have a significant impact to New Zealand. But having said that, we have a lot of interest in deep tech. So I think we've been really well insulated. Mm-hmm. Certainly in Auckland, it seems to be business as usual. I think Wellington's a little more depressed at the moment. It's just a function of government cuts. Okay. But as a country, I think there's enough excitement in biotech and it seemed enough momentum within the new government to change the regulations that actually there could be a new sector created. Mm. So what I'm looking at on the regulation side is, if you have governance and compliance that's fit for purpose, so you don't just have sweeping GMO blocks, if you like, but you have the tiered system, which is really what this Harnessing Biotech paper talked about, so that it's kind of fit for purpose, so that you can operate within still a constrained and regulated environment, but with appropriate risk measures, you can start to do really cool stuff. Mm-hmm. You can start to get some momentum in technology, particularly around gene editing or the CAR T-cell programs. Mm-hmm. Once those become, let's say, let's go for world leading, you prove out the technology, then the money will come because it's amazing stuff. And if you can prove it in New Zealand with our small population and you can make a difference, the capital will absolutely flow. Right. There's no question the money will come.
Yeah. Just a matter of when, but after that, the demonstration of success.
The demonstration of success. Let's look at Rocket Labs. I mean, it was a hell of a journey to try and raise capital for a new industry like that.
Yeah.
Because we had no space industry.
Yeah. Who would have thought from little old
Who would
New
have
Zealand?
thought? And now we're the fourth largest provider of satellites now, from one person with a dream and a company that popped out of a laboratory here in Auckland.
Yeah, with the shared dogged attitude that we're just going to make this happen. We're going to...
That's exactly right. Gaming industry did the same thing. We're now, certainly from Bridgewest standpoint, biotech is a natural fit for our industry. And biotech, don't forget, isn't just drugs. We're talking about agricultural benefits, climate, environmental benefits. The medical side is a given. Yep.
Yeah, what I had this discussion with a colleague of mine, and we were talking about day job, obviously, and how... So I come from a biomedical science background, and
Right.
the Master of Bioscience Enterprise, and when you've done your science degree, you come out with a very maybe a curious mind, but also one that's very has a very formulaic approach to everything, and you like to operate within the bounds of what you think is appropriate, but it also makes you very much following the rules to a certain level, but that doesn't. I might get myself in trouble here, but that playing too closely within the rules doesn't get you into that next phase, if that makes sense.
Yeah, you've got to push it.
You've got to push the boundaries a little bit, and the phrase that we came up with is you have to shape the world around you. Yes, there might be constraints in multitude of different areas. There always will be. You're never going to be free from constraints.
Yeah.
But you can also influence the world around you
100%.
By playing, a little bit within the rules, shall we say, or slightly outside the rules.
No, I totally agree.
Yeah.
So I'm actually pleased you're on Master of Bioscience because that's our favourite program. So plug for the university. It's actually unique in terms of it gives you that commercial aspect along with the science. So we love that program. I know Zara Champion from Biotech NZ is a mentor or a lecturer within the course. It's one that we feel other universities should copy. Because it's putting out rounded, intelligent, articulate scientists with a lens on expanding their horizons and looking at commercialization. But you're right, we have to bend the rules. The framework that the government are putting out with the Harnessing Biotech isn't breaking the rules. It's actually just putting a regulation framework that's fit for purpose rather than stopping innovation. It's enabling innovation. And certainly within companies like, say, BioVeros and BioOra, the CAR T-cell program, you have to go fast. And you have to be nimble, and you have to not necessarily cut corners. But in New Zealand, you don't have the capital to have a 50-person lab. So you've got to do it with 20 people on an oily rag, and it makes you hungry for success, and it creates a really interesting entrepreneurial sort of mindset, which is we have to do more with less from this country. It doesn't mean we should cut corners in terms of regulations and compliance, but you have to go fast. Otherwise, you're just going to be destroyed by the rest of the world. But we can do it. There's proof that we can do it.
Definitely. And I suppose if you're, sitting at your desk trying to come up with this perfect, down to the letter plan of what you're going to achieve over the next 12 to 18 to 24 months, too late.
Not a chance. You just have to run it. Now, this is what's so cool about New Zealand founders, right? They're thinking, how do I do this with nothing? And often we get a lot of pitches. There's about 240 a year that the team are looking at. It's an enormous number. It's enormous. And many just get dismissed because they haven't thought it through. But then every now and again you come across a founder where they've just started. It's like, have you got a business plan? No, but this is what I've done. And you're like, wow, how did you do that? And often it comes out of a university, out of necessity. They've been in a lab in the corner working on a piece of technology. And they're the ones you want. And if you wrap your arms around them and guide them, they're the ones that will be the superstars, the Peter Becks of 5 years from now.
Yeah. It's almost just, like providing them with enough, maybe security is the wrong word, but encouragement,
confidence.
support.
It's the
confidence. There we go.
Yeah.
To actually achieve what was already inside them all along.
Yeah, pretty much. And our job as a VC, which I share with how I think WNT and Brandon's operate, is you want to support them, give them the confidence, but also clear the barriers out the way.
Right.
So our job isn't just about the capital. It's about, we've done this a lot of times, it's knowing what are the pitfalls. And then you go to the founder and say, look, this is what's going to happen in the next 3 years. Are you ready? And they're like, okay, that sounds good. And then you say, you're really ready, because you have to describe what is a harrowing journey through the 7 layers of hell to become successful. And good founders look at it, accept it, and then start the journey, and they know it's going to be tough. But as long as you're there with them and you're supporting them and trying to clear the barriers out of the way, and if you can do that with influencing government on things that are in the way, capital that's not available to them, and you can start to open doors for them. They can just focus on their goal, which is hopefully a global impact of some sort.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's not really just about, you've already said it, but it's not just about the money, which I think a lot of people will go, oh, venture capital, private capital, it's just about the money. But really it's you've been here, done this 100 times, or you've seen it vicariously through other portfolio companies, and you can almost...
Yeah, money can be a crutch. I don't think there's any founder that said... I said this at the one of the conferences a couple of months ago. There's not a single founder that ever says, I was successful because I had too much money. It's not what happens. You become successful because you're hungry, you're lean, and you've got this desire to change something, whether it's biotech or medtech or rocketry. You just want to change the world. And you won't do it by being lavished with a couple of $1 million. You'll do it because you're just hungry to succeed. The financial part of it is secondary.
Yeah, that's interesting. I had a conversation with actually Zara on the podcast about three weeks ago, and I asked her, what do we in New Zealand do differently or not as well as some of our peers, say across the pond and across the Tasman or whatever. And she mentioned that one of the things that we don't do well here is that we don't shout from the rooftops how good we really are.
Yeah,
in certain different aspects. Kiwis play it quite close to the chest, shall we say, tall poppy syndrome and all that kind of jazz.
Yeah.
I think we really need to advertise what we do well and yell it from the rooftops.
It's a very humble thing, and the tall poppy is real, but it's an overused phrase.
Right.
It's kind of humbleness. And I look at it, actually, we have one of our portfolio companies, BioValio, which is run by Julie Jones as the CEO. So she's working on running clinical trials. Yeah. And you've got Julie and Ruth, who run that company, are super focused on improving New Zealand's clinical trials landscape. And it's a startup company, it's a new company. And we had a board meeting this morning, and it's so pleasing for us as investors to see a founder with successes. And the challenge for me today was, why are you not shouting about these things? You've got revenue, you're actually running trials, you're helping and enabling others to bring targets or therapies to New Zealand, and which is fantastic. But you're just sort of saying it in a matter of fact, we've done this. Yeah. But you should celebrate. And I think I'd say the same to all our founders. It's not about being arrogant and screaming you're the best. It's about, hey, look at what we did. And that attracts global interest. So it's putting stuff out on LinkedIn. It's a great place to just get some global awareness.
Absolutely.
Being clever about the words you use, but every week ruthlessly putting out, this is what we did. It's not arrogance, it's educational, and people will pick it up. We're not good at it.
And kind of what you said earlier, I mean, that money will follow the success.
Absolutely.
But money will only follow the success if money is aware of the success.
Spot on. That's exactly right. And we have to talk about it. Yeah.
And it doesn't cost anything to throw a post up on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
It's very expensive to go to big conferences overseas and do it that way. But I mean, you've in today's day and age, you really need to be.
You have to tell the story.
Yeah, telling the story.
You have to tell the story.
Giving updates on a regular basis to keep people interested. And let that money know that you've got that success.
Well, let me give you an example of it in a switching into a different tangent. So I sit on the board of a charity called the 1% Collective. It's a bit of a plug for the charity.
Nice.
And their job is just to encourage generosity, right? And all we do as an organisation is we tell the stories of these small charities so that people are aware of them, so that they can donate to them. And all the money that comes in through 1% goes dollar for dollar to the charities. But these charities are often very bad at telling their story. Because they're often too involved in grassroots care and support to their constituents, whatever their charity is, whatever their articles are. Yep. So our role is to tell the story, and we've been very successful because we're articulating what the charities have failed to do, saying, look at this amazing work they've done, and that generates revenue. It's exactly the same for the startups. Unless you tell the story, people won't know. Yeah. And today we've got 3 startups in Series A, and they've all got phenomenal stories, but unless you can go out to the world and say, look at this, and be convincing and compelling and data-driven, nobody's going to know. And it's impossible to raise enough money in New Zealand to do what, say, Rocket Labs have done. You have to find global capital, which means you need to go and scream at the top of your lungs, look at me.
Yeah. And that kind of is a nice segue to my next question, which was, where does the money for VC come from? We kind of think that, okay, well, you're providing money and you're providing support and you're providing, coaching and, fending off various things or preempting what's going to happen down the line for these founders. But where does that money come from?
Yeah, great question. You got a lot of good questions, Charles. So it depends on different VCs, right?
Yeah.
So most of the VCs run the fund structure in New Zealand. In other words, they've got some seed capital either from themselves or from high net worths, and they go and they raise money from a group of people that know and trust them, and they'll build up a war chest, which they'll wrap in a fund structure.
Yep.
Whether it's fund 1, fund 2, fund 3, etc. That's the most traditional model, and it's quite good because it enables people that are literally have got some spare cash and want to be part of this amazing potential success to actually stake a little bit. And when you add it up, you end up with a fund of $1 million or 10 million.
Yep.
And most of the VCs do that. We're a little different. Bridgewest Ventures is part of a larger US group. We don't raise money for we'll call it our fund externally. It's only proprietary capital. So I'm in this very fortunate position that my team and I don't have to go and raise capital for each investment we make. It's proprietary capital. So we go to an investment committee. We go through a very rigorous and quite difficult process to prove this investment value. And then money's released to us from our US parent to align to those investments. So it's slightly different. Most funds here will have raised capital from whether it's the retail public or wholesale public.
Yeah.
And they'll live and die on their success on previous transactions. If they've had a great exit on some funds, then it's much easier to raise money. When times are difficult, as they are right now, it's really difficult to raise for the funds.
Right.
Yeah.
So for you guys, are you putting together a fund on the basis of, well, you said not previous success, you don't have to look through that, but are you putting together a proposal to the investment committee on the basis of a bunch of companies that you've identified are looking really good, and you're saying, hey, look at this, give us some money, or is it
we
the other
go
way
company
around?
by company.
Okay.
So we'll make an investment case to our investment group. We want to invest in this company. These are the conditions. This is what the term sheet would look like.
Yeah.
This is the mechanics, the addressable market. This is the founder, and we'll get approval from there. And the beautiful thing about being part of that Callaghan scheme is, if we invest, then Callaghan will allow the company to apply for 3-to-1 funding through the scheme. So if we put in, let's say, $250,000,
Yep.
it's the same for Brandon and WNT. Then the government, through the Callaghan scheme, will release a loan of $750,000 to that company. So it becomes $1 million round with only $250 of dilutionary capital.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's repayable. It's not a grant.
Yeah.
It's repayable on success.
Yeah.
And it's a great way to do it because we're taking the equity risk.
Yeah.
And then the government's basically, we're underwriting their debt.
Yes.
And it's a nice way to encourage VCs to invest in slightly earlier stage, because a company with $1 million's got more chance of being successful than a company with, say, 250.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it's still not enough. We'd love it to be double that, particularly in biotech, to be honest, because it's not big enough for biotech.
No, because I was thinking, how far would $250,000 get you in biotech?
It might get you one machine. It certainly won't get you a lab, but it might get you a quarter of a second-hand machine or a fridge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's an interesting. So that must be quite appealing as well for founders, because they're not giving up a huge amount of equity. They have to pay back the loan if they're successful, or is it?
If they're successful, it's an unsecured loan.
Right.
It's repayable at a very small interest rate. The government demand a 3% of revenue return. So based on the financial results, it's pretty small.
Yeah.
You wouldn't be able to get that from the bank, that's for sure. So it's unsecured. If a company fails, then you can request for it to be written off. So it's not one of those conditions where if you've borrowed money to start a business and it goes bust, and the bank say, well, you still owe us this money. You can petition under the contract and say, the company failed, here's the reasons for its failure. And then Callaghan at its discretion can write off the loan. Right. And that's you expect that to happen on a number of companies, and we've written off one or two. We know the others have also written off one or two. We were concerned that there would be an inquisition if a company failed, but there's allowance within the scheme for a percentage of companies to fail, which is good. It's reassuring. Nobody would go into VC if there was a 100% guarantee of it being successful with there, or there'd be government penalties. You wouldn't do it.
Yeah. So if the industry average, say for venture capital, is 1 in 10 companies might be successful. I don't know if that's accurate. That's just a number I've picked out of thin air.
It's pretty close. I'm pretty sure. Yeah.
What do you refer
it's
to?
More like
spray and pray.
Spray and pray, which is derogatory, and it's
But what would be your approach at Bridgewest? Is it more of a 1 in 5?
Well, that's a tough question. I'm going to get hot under the collar. Look, we want 100% because you're giving your heart and soul to each company. If you were in the business of not doing that, then you shouldn't be investing.
Sure.
So myself, my team, our executives, our advisors, we're giving 100% for the duration. But at the end of the day, there's two outcomes. You either fail or you succeed, right? And if you fail, it's normally because you've either run out of money, most cases, or there's been a failure of the technology, and then you run out of money. Yep. There's no other outcomes in biotech or deep tech. So the key for us to be successful is to be really close to the companies, understand the burn rate, understand the addressable market, and make sure that you know at any one point in time what are the risks of failure and how do you deal to them before it happens, which typically means in the last 6 months of a company's financial runway, you've either got to make some decisions that it's not working or you pivot. And if it is working, it's great because then you obviously start raising money.
Yeah.
But you've just got to have your hands on it every day.
Yeah.
Because it changes so quickly.
Yeah.
And it's not a failure if the tech fails. It's just, well, we tried.
Yeah.
It's only a failure if you've lost sight or there was no market and you didn't do your due diligence and there was never a market and you've invested. You're like, that's embarrassing. Don't want any of those.
I had another discussion with another venture capitalist, and I asked him, what would you do different? What would you think we should do differently when it comes to finding those companies to, say, spin out of a university or, identifying founders? And one of the comments he made was, it'd be great if there was a way in which venture capital or the people with expertise in doing due diligence and finding out what the total addressable market of a technology is and all that kind of nitty-gritty stuff that probably founders or academics or researchers wouldn't ever think about. They're just all about the technology or the latest experiment, is coming alongside those founders and helping them write grant applications for, public dollars so that all the way back at that really super early, almost academic stage, the research is being primed for a commercial perspective. So it doesn't happen halfway through when you're like, oh, this is a good idea, let's make an entity around this idea, around this concept. It's all the way back at blue skies benchtop research.
It sort of happens. It happens. It's not haphazard. It happens quite well within most of the universities in New Zealand.
Right.
So you have the concept of the TechTransfer Office.
Yep.
And this group exists to really manage the patents, manage the technology, ensure that there's security or protections around anything that's invented, so that the university has some way to recover some of that investment, if you like. And they all operate slightly differently, but there is a big review at the moment over the structure. So it's one that I don't know what's going to happen in the future, but I fully suspect that there'll be some changes. And it's primarily to drive, I think, a consistent outcome for publicly funded research. So one of the challenges we face is if you're a young researcher and you've invented something, what are your pathways? Do you actually own that technology? Well, if it's been funded by the university, then probably not. But if you're an inventor on a patent, then there's some inherent value that you've brought by inventing it. So what is a fair amount of equity for you to have? And it's one that's been debated at length. There was a great article actually from Andrew Chen a little while ago, maybe a month or two ago, around valuations and equity positions of founders. A response from, actually I can't remember the response from. There was a response. It was an interesting counter argument. But these are the challenges. So who made the money? Who invested? Who owns it? And certainly from our standpoint, you need an inventor and a founder. And if the university owns the whole rights to, say, the technology, but they're passive, why would you invest? You need the founder to be part of it, and they need to have a commercial outcome. So I agree with you. If there's a mechanism for that founder or that researcher or that academic to have some support, so they really understand what is the path they're going down, how do they commercialize, that would be great. And there are lots of programs, accelerators and incubators that kind of do that. But certainly they're doing it within the university environment, and that doesn't necessarily equal a good outcome.
Right.
If we go back to that infrastructure comment,
Yeah.
if there was an innovation space that was, say, publicly and privately funded, which had really strong commercial outcomes that these people could go and work into, sponsored or otherwise, then you're going to get a much harder edge and a much hungrier outcome, I suspect, from the work they do.
Right.
That'd be a great result, actually.
Yeah. Why do you think there isn't something like that already? Is it just money or government commitment to long-term spinning up such a huge infrastructure project to support these kind of things?
Yeah, it's infrastructure we're a small country.
Yeah.
So where do you put it?
Yeah.
Because you don't need 3 of them or 5 of them. You kind of need one.
Got to pick and choose winners, I suppose.
Yeah.
One of the cities.
I mean, maybe you could do it, but you're not going to get the velocity or critical mass because it'll be sort of a point solution, which is kind of what we've got. I think part of this review that's underway at the moment is to really look at what are what are the areas of expertise and how do we leverage them.
Yeah.
But if I look at some of the success stories, so if I look at Unit Services as an example and the team there, it's a mature group. They've got massive experience, a very solid patent portfolio, a very structured approach to investment, an investment fund that can seed founders, can take founders to the next level, ready for commercialization by VCs.
Yep.
And it works really, really well. And then some other universities don't have the luxury of a fund, so they're really dependent on writing grants, if you like. And then that becomes a sort of self-fulfilling problem because once you're writing grants, you continue to write grants, and there's no desire to be anything else. But most universities have got a tech transfer team. They all work slightly differently. They all have different models of equity. So you've kind of got to look at the whole thing as a system and go, right, in a perfect world, what would we do? You can look to Australia, you can look to America, you can look to all the different jurisdictions around the world, and they all kind of do it slightly differently.
Yep.
And there are arguments for the university should own everything, to the founder should own everything.
Sure. Yeah.
And the truth is it's company by company.
Yeah.
And for investors like us, the critical path is does the founder have enough equity to be successful? If to be driven, if they don't, then you have to have a pathway to give them more equity, which is kind of the model that we adopt.
Okay.
Which is good ESOPs,
Yeah.
good bonuses, good structure around what does success look like,
Yeah.
and being shameless about it. Do you want to be rich? Do you want to be successful? Do you want to have impact? Don't be shy.
Yeah.
What does it look like in that sort of trite question in 5 years? What do you want to be? And the founder needs to be able to articulate that. And then you structure a company around them in that way.
Right. Yeah. So it has to be bespoke, essentially.
I think every deal's bespoke.
Yeah.
I get slightly frustrated when I read the LinkedIn comments around, a founder needs to have 80%. And there's a couple of VCs that talk about that, and that's their model, and there's nothing wrong with it because they're looking for founders who have invented something in their garage. We're not part of that. We're part of a scheme that's trying to commercialize publicly funded research.
Yeah.
And at the same time, obviously look for founders that have built it in their garage. But each deal's separate.
Yeah.
And sometimes there's no founder.
Yeah.
But there's 10 years of research, and we're like, okay, well, let's find someone, and let's incentivize them who really believes in this technology.
So in such an instance as that, they wouldn't have an ownership stake, a huge ownership stake in the company.
Sometimes zero.
Right.
They come in as a CEO, and it's like, okay. And some of them just want their technology. Maybe they were a PhD student, like Sean out of the University of Canterbury with Precision Chroma. He's come in and been incentivized through equity and ESOP. He's building a team with ESOP. He just wants this tech in the world.
Yeah.
But we want him to be successful, and he needs to be recognized for that.
Totally.
And Canterbury University have been phenomenal because they recognize the value of the individual, and that without him as a CEO leading this business, their patents are worth nothing.
Yeah.
They're not going to get to market.
Yeah.
And those are the deals that you structure. And it's been awesome actually working with the UC team because they're progressive in terms of we have something that's potentially worth something, but right now it's worth nothing.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's been really good. We've enjoyed working with them really a lot actually.
Oh, that's good. Bridgewest has a number of portfolio companies in the CAR-T space.
Yeah.
So all the bios. So BioVeros, BioValio, BioOra.
Yeah.
What was the strategy around, focusing on that CAR-T space? Super tech heavy, very complex, from the technology to the human application.
Yeah.
What was the genesis around setting up all of that?
I'm not allowed to have favourites, but this sector is up there because it's it's global impact, right? So there's nothing more commendable than the business case of curing cancer. And it's an area that I've been involved with for more than 20 years now, is around how do you create equitable outcomes for cancer treatment.
Yep.
Which is, it's a big statement, but it's really saying that not everyone in New Zealand has the same outcome through various means. We could have a whole podcast on that. When we had this opportunity to partner with the Malagan specifically on their CAR T-cell program, it was one of the first transactions we did under the Callaghan scheme. We looked at the data. We looked at the many years of research, and we looked at the team behind this development of their CD19 construct, their non-Hodgkin's lymphoma candidate, right?
Yep.
And it was sensational data. It was data that was comparable in many ways to the treatments that were already at that time being registered, and it was superior in other ways. So superior in terms of it was a very low dose therapy, had a very good safety profile. And then the main one was, how much does it cost to manufacture? And the Malagan had built a really cool manual process for producing this therapy. And it's quite complicated. It's involving shaking flasks. It's real science.
Yeah.
They have a GMP facility, phenomenal scientific team. The question was, okay, how do you scale this up to be a real therapy that you can give to people in an environment of New Zealand where there are no big manufacturing sites that are GMP?
Yep.
So we looked at it and we thought this is actually worth the risk, because it's the potential impact is global. And then you sort of work backwards from there. What would you need to do for this therapy to be the first line of treatment for people with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, as an example? And you sort of work back from that. And you need a scale-up operation, so automation of the manufacturing.
Yep.
You need to finish the trials and then go through all the different regulations and MedSafe to approve it. At this moment in time, we had challenges around automation. We had challenges around skill sets. We had challenges around clinical trials. We had challenges around ingredients. One of the main ingredients, to use that word, is lentiviral, vectors for transduction. So we have BioVirus. We spent a lot of time and money, and the team were tasked with building an entire end-to-end production process for lentivirus, so that in New Zealand we could actually manufacture, rather than be sort of at the mercy of global producers.
Yeah,
that was really important. So we invested in that company. Julie Jones and BioValio is clinical trials. So now you've got an ability to run bespoke trials for cars. And of course, BioOra, the manufacturing engine itself. So they've automated. They've produced therapy for patients. Malagan ran a phase 1 trial. Sensational results. About to start the phase 2 trial, which we anticipate will be great results.
Yeah.
Company's just about to start raising money on its Series A. And it's global impact.
Yeah.
But more importantly, it puts New Zealand on the map as probably, if this all works, and this is a very future-looking statement, if this works, it'll be the world's safest, most effective, cheapest to produce, cancer treatment.
Yeah.
So why would you not do that? And then if you can do that, why do you not bring other people's CAR constructs into New Zealand?
Yeah.
Why do you not in-license other people's therapies?
Absolutely.
And then New Zealand could be the place on the planet that people come to for immunotherapy.
Yeah.
So it's pretty cool.
Beautiful mountains, and also will cure your cancer.
Will cure cancer, and it's real.
Yeah.
It's actually real. The team, Rob Winecove, the team at Malagan, it's been an amazing journey watching how they've taken that business forward.
Absolutely. Well, what I love about that whole thing is that it's really had a long-term ultimate perspective or ultimate goal in mind from the outset. As the manufacturing of the lentiviral vectors, the manufacturing of the actual autologous CAR T cells, and then the monitoring of patients for. So you've set up this massive framework that's not just suitable for the Malagan's CAR,
it's suitable for any
but it's
CAR.
for anyone, which is fantastic.
Yep.
And what I love about it is that without something like this, you could argue that New Zealand would miss out on research and commercially available CAR T cell, or there's other CARs as well, not just T cell.
But they're not going to come to New Zealand. This is what's the economic driver of a multi-billion-dollar global biotech to go, I will manufacture in New Zealand.
Yeah,
they won't. They'll take blood from New Zealand and manufacture elsewhere, or we won't have the treatment, or worse, we'll have to ship people overseas.
Yeah,
which we don't have the equity of care then, because there'll be those that can travel and those that can't. So the goal really is to try and create this as a frontline treatment, which requires changes to regulation. It requires changes to mindset in the health system, and of course it has to work.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of spinning plates on this one, but our feeling as an investment group, and we have a lot of experience in cancer therapeutics and design. We have another CAR T cell company overseas, which are looking at solid tumours. It feels just about right.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of looking at New Zealand as this wonderful oven, and you're kind of looking through the glass thinking, is the cake ready? It's looking like all the things are perfect, ready for a beautiful cake.
Love that.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I work in my day job, I work as a project manager for radiopharmaceutical trials.
Oh, there we go. You
and
know exactly what I'm talking about.
One of the things, as my role has got more and more global, I'm constantly looking back at New Zealand and going, man, there's just so many really intensely passionate and clever people. And then on the flip side, we just don't have access the way that we should to new medicines, right? So there's this almost like this perfect storm of like really, really clever people, but there's a huge gap, and there needs to be more clinical trials
100%
to close the gap in access, because I don't think there's going to be more public spending. I don't think pharma are going to change their ways in the next...
We don't have the money, so it's going to come down to public-private.
And, patients on some of my trials, they won't get access to something that's been, made available commercially in the last 10 years, without going on a trial, because it's, that the latest and greatest are just not available.
So here's an interesting number for you. Back to that 2020 report from Biotech NZ. The estimate at that point was that the clinical trials sector, call it a sector in New Zealand, is worth about $880 million, so nearly $1 billion. If you get it right. So if you imagine the scenario where we've actually got a number of cars in operation in New Zealand, number of therapies, number of different treatments for different cancers, and you're running trials here, then you start to attract the big farmers or some of the universities who want to do translational research here.
Yeah.
But in order to do that, you need laboratories. So we're right back to infrastructure.
Yeah.
So we're kind of juggling all those things as a group. So Bridgewest is obviously we're trying to influence and promote that this is a good thing to do. And there's risks.
Yes.
Because do you go first and then the government come in afterwards, or should the government go first and then VC come in afterwards? And it's a really difficult one. The real truth is you kind of have to do it together.
Right.
So therefore, you kind of hold hands and step forward together. It's a bit like you're blindfolded and you're walking with someone. As long as you're in step, you kind of feel safe, even if you're walking towards a cliff.
Yeah.
But if you're leading and hoping that they're following, whether it's the government leading or VC leading, is a dangerous position because you're kind of isolated.
Yeah.
Our feeling is at the moment that there's such interest in biotech, not just for therapeutics I mentioned, but for environment and the like, that it's a unique position that New Zealand finds itself in, that we could actually build a brand new sector. We could own therapeutics. We could own clinical trials. We can do it cheaper. We have the teams and the experience. It's just the infrastructure, the capital, and the bravery to run at this.
Yeah.
But, hey, that's what VC is all about.
Totally. I love it. Maybe to finish up, what advice would you give a budding entrepreneur in the biotech space? Maybe someone that thinks they have a great idea. What advice would you give them to make the most of those?
Yeah. Number one is understand your product. What is it you're actually doing? And do your research around addressable market. So we've seen so many innovations that the founder hasn't done their basic homework on who's going to use this product? Who's my addressable market? So TAM is the phrase we use, the total addressable market.
Yep.
Who is going to buy this? Because if you don't have a market, then you could invent the world's best something. That's the first part of it. Just because it's the best thing doesn't mean it's going to be the one that people buy, right? So there's the historical VHS and Betamax story that everyone knows. Yeah. So they need to do the homework, and they need to write a fundamental, basic, high-level business case, which if you're in a university, there's teams that will help you. There's lots of accelerators and the groups. But if you're going to make a pitch to a VC, you've got one chance, because we're all really, really busy. And if someone else has done their homework and your email comes in and it's got a poor slide deck, it doesn't address the market need, the unique sort of selling proposition of what you got, you won't even get in the door. So the example I'll give you for our funnel, and it's the same for most VCs, for every 100 deals that come in our funnel, 50% are gone in the first meeting.
Right.
So of every 100, we're now down to 50 after an hour.
Yeah.
Then we're down to 25 after a bit more due diligence, typically more 4 hours. So we've gone from 100 to 25 really quickly. So you've already gone if you haven't done your basic homework. And then the 25 to typically 3 to 5 deals that we'll do out of the 100 is really around, how novel is this? Is the founder really wedded to this? Are they convincing, compelling? Is it a good team? And then the technology comes in afterwards. So my advice would be do your homework, check your market, check why you're unique, and never have a slide that says there's no competition, because there's always competition.
Yeah. Love it. Well, John, this has been really insightful. Thank you so much.
No,
really appreciate it. And I for one, I'm super excited about the next 5-10 years, I think, in biotech in New Zealand.
Yeah, me too.
Even despite my role taking me further and further away in my day job, I just love having these conversations and telling these stories to whoever will listen.
No, fantastic. Well, we should regroup in 5 years when we're a international cancer centre.
Perfect.
Providing the world's best therapies. That's the goal.
Yeah, love it.
Great. Thanks, Charles.
Thanks, John.